Welcome to your, oh, actually it looks a little, there we go, sweet. Thanks, Benji. Perfect, so we're back, moving on from PsychSoc, I guess moving on from ChemPhys into PsychSoc, once again full length 4. Remember, we've got pretty much the same crew that was in here for the previous class, but you do not want to be here unless you have already taken full length 4. What's going on, Sarah? But yeah, so remember, this of course is meant to be a review. We're going to run through a couple different things. We'll try to focus on the kind of big picture stuff and talk about the AMC's goals. In fact, that's pretty much the main structure of this class. It's kind of neat, but it's actually arranged around the specific things that the AAMC says themselves in terms of primary skills and ways that it gets tested. And so a lot of this is actually going to be a way to talk about the AMC's goals and why they're doing this PsychSoc section in the first place, what it's for, and the way that you're going to really see it on test day. And so a lot of this is really your ability to manage a complex workload. As you go through it, you're going to get a bunch of information, and what they want you to do is not read everything carefully and figure out the nitty-gritties. It's how to really get the main point, because that's what you need to do in med school. The readings you're going to get for homework are going to be so much over the top, you probably won't actually read them all. But you got to get through the stuff that matters the most, enough to at least get a good score on the exams. And so it's kind of a similar thing that you're going to have to do in med school, hence the AMC making this a big part of the new MCAT. All right, so that's what they're really trying to measure. Can you get through a bunch of crap in a short period of time and still pull out the main points? All right, so that's what we'll do in the very beginning, how to basically spend your time efficiently on very short social science type passages. We'll also talk about all 4 of the AMC's actual skills and the ways that they show up in the context of discrete questions. As far as also the last one, we probably won't do the last learning goal. It's basically just going through one of the passages that you had in your exam. That's a time valve. We'll use it if we want to. But we'll primarily focus on the first and second learning goals today and really kind of dive into the actual AMC skills and talk about it the way that the AMC states it. Speaking of, have you guys actually went to the AMC site and looked at the actual list of the goals and the way that they want to test everything? You guys actually checked that out yet? It's all publicly available online. Briefly, I would go to their page if you haven't done it yet. If you just Google AAMC MCAT 2015, it actually has it's a really cool little interactive thing. It even has example question videos where it'll show you the way that they're going to ask questions in the context of the test. It's actually, I spent a couple hours on it actually over the weekend. I'm really kind of digging into it. It's pretty cool, and so if you haven't seen it yet, I do recommend checking it out. I especially wanted to look at it for the PsychSoc just to see the way that they're going to test this stuff. As you know, it's different. It's the most different section of the test altogether. So, all right, so check it out if you haven't already, and that's what we'll do in the second learning goal. We'll basically pull those details directly and then talk about the way that it shows up on the test. All right, so first learning goal, of course, how to spend your time efficiently on these super short science passages. A lot of this is going to be basically really kind of getting familiar with the terminology, getting used to pattern recognition, how the section looks, and just not let it basically freak you out or let you feel overly daunted or scared. So this is, of course, the standard way that we divide time on behavioral sciences section of the test. A minute per discrete, 8 minutes per passage, about 3 minutes to read, create your outline, and about 5 minutes per questions. So it gives you about 1 minute per question across the board. Now, as it says, this is not your typical timing of every single passage. It's just kind of average, like the standard timing. Sometimes you're going to spend way more than this. Well, not way more. A bit more than this. Sometimes you'll spend a lot less. But so yeah, not every passage requires the same amount of time allocation. What I do strongly recommend, actually, so you guys are already on full length 4. You're a ways in. Are you doing okay with timing on PsychSoc? How is timing going for you guys on this section? Feels good? Finishing early? Cool, lots of extra time, no big deal. Great. Yeah, that's, Charmaine, that's what I was going to say. In my opinion, and this is, I've been studying for the MCAT since 2006, CARS, or the old verbal, has always been the hardest on timing. The other sections, once you guys kind of get really deep into it, it usually isn't too much of an issue. And so if it's not an issue, if you're always finishing early, mostly just stop yourself from going over the top. One thing that we have seen with students is people will finish traditionally pretty early, maybe 5 minutes early, and then on test day maybe get way more granular and focusing on the details and then actually run out of time. That's scary. You don't want anything to happen different on test day than the real thing. So the only way you really prevent that from happening is just letting the outliers not happen. If you realize that you're spending way too much time on a passage, just cut it, go on. And that's what this triaging is really all about. So make sure you practice like you play, as we say. And so really try to do everything you're going to do on the real thing the same on all of your practice tests. That's kind of like the net goal and the main idea between doing all this stuff. All right. But yeah, it's especially, man, triaging is especially important in any sections that you know you struggle with timing. And it sounds like a lot of you have the same experience that I've had in the past. That yeah, cars can kind of be like the trickiest of them all, but the rest of them aren't quite as bad as a general rule. All right. So we'll go through this short passage. Notice if you glance at this. And remember, the way when you look at these passages on the actual MCAT, it will tell you in the upper corner how many questions you have. Like it'll directly say above the passage, like questions like 1 through 4 or something like that. So you know how many questions, even with the change. Like now it's different where I know that your sample test still, your test still has all the questions listed. It'll show one at a time, but it still shows like you still know how many it is. So it's really not that much different. It's pretty much the same idea. And so if you do have a passage like this where you're like, oh man, there's only 4 questions, one thing to keep in mind is, well, 4 questions means only 4 points. So if you glance at the beginning and you're like, this looks either really interesting or very complicated or somewhere in the middle, if it looks like it's a bit of a pain to go through, then just skip it, don't even do it, jump to the next one. Remember, because 4 questions means 4 points. Cool. Generally speaking, though, what you'll often see is that when you do get these shorter passages, you can actually get through them pretty quickly just doing a lot of kind of reading, a bit of scanning, and basically it'll let you figure out how much time you should spend or really let you be more efficient and focused as you're going through the test. So real quick, like what was your, so we kind of looked through it, looked at the passage. What did we think when you saw this on test day? Were you kind of like, oh sweet, this looks easy, I don't feel overly intimidated? Yeah, and it is, you got it, maybe. It's already in the AMC sample test, totally true. Oh, nice. Good to hear, Marlo. Yeah, less variability and difficulty than the other sections. Yeah. It sounds like I've been kind of impressed, but a lot of people have been kind of reporting that the PsychSoc wasn't as intimidating or as bad as they expected it to be. Is that what you've been kind of seeing as well? Where has it been? Yeah, Kaylin, that's so true. It really is kind of turning into a vocabulary test, where a lot of mediums, difficulty tends to not be too intense, but if it's testing, different theories and you don't know Piaget and you don't know whatever it is, you got to know your terms. And so that's the one thing I've been noticing too across the board. You got to get all those different terminology down. And so one thing that's kind of fun to do, you don't have to do this. There's lots of ways you can kind of go through it. Flashcards are great for it. One thing that I personally think is fun to do is I'll actually go to the AMC site directly and actually like copy and paste. Like here's an example. I just actually copied this off there yesterday. And like here's it in chat. You can like literally like that's like directly copied from the AMC's list of things. You basically just make a document, put that thing down, and then just write what the definition is next to the term. The act of writing it in helps us remember it, and then you have like the legit AMC list of things that they say they're testing with, of course, all the definitions. As you basically flip through your review notes, find the term, write it down in the thing. It's a nice way to kind of make a composite sheet of all the different terms and what you need to memorize and not. And this is legitimately how we made your review notes. It's how we built the course. It was using the AAMC's list of things that are tested. So like if it's in your review notes, that means it was on the AAMC's list in the first place. And so that's kind of the neat thing. That's like why we structured the thing that we wanted. But so yeah, exactly. Know your terms. So flashcards are good, bathroom mirrors good, all that stuff's great. But I agree with a lot of you guys. It has turned into very much a vocabulary test for a lot of the PsychSoc stuff, which is kind of a pain. But we got to play by the rules the AMC sets for us. Cool. Perfect. All right, so let's look through this. So what did we learn in this first paragraph? How would you outline this? We'll go through an outline together as a team, but... So language, you got it. A couple other things to talk about here. Yeah, we're talking about the Sapir-Whorf language thing. Exactly true. Mostly what to do, though. So what about language? Language and... First sentence actually gives it to you. Cognition, Kaylin, exactly. So it's all about how language affects cognition. So a couple of things it says here. things such as commonly interpreted to mean. Notice we have right there. And so like a lot of this is, let me kind of move this off so I can actually see the full thing. Yeah, right there it says, such examples are commonly interpreted to imply. What does that tell you about the author? Such examples are commonly interpreted to imply that cultures with richer linguistic ties to concepts have a greater understanding of those concepts. You know, commonly cited examples involve the claim that Inuit people have different words for different claims of snow, or they hope you use different words to distinguish between drinking water, lake, or stream. Yeah, you got it, Marlo. It's that the author is kind of posing this as, well, it's commonly interpreted this way, which means they're either going to be straight neutral or they're going to disagree with it. You got it. But it doesn't sound like the kind of language an author would use to say, like, this is my theory, or yes, I agree with this, or this is what I believe. So we're kind of getting the tone right off the bat about, the whole, this different hypothesis. And here's even more so, the most elaborate argument. That's a real strong language there to say, okay, it sounds like the author, they're not calling it the most, the strongest argument or the most impressive argument. The most elaborate argument, that sounds a little, what do we call that? Condescending, I think would be a way to describe that. Critical, Charmaine, exactly. So that's the kind of thing like, all right, so this sounds like, that kind of seals the deal. The author doesn't like this stuff so much, or at least they're going to be critiquing it. But what's the main idea here that the author kind of brings in? Or is it even new information? Yeah, Marlo, it's basically debunking evidence. Notice that this entire paragraph is primarily just giving you example of what we talked about in the previous one. You got it, that it's like exactly later, and also notice at the very bottom it says, later researchers have not found evidence supporting such a conceptualization of time by the Hopi. We're debunking it, right? So it's difference between this and conceptualization of time, you could say. But the main idea is that the author thinks that this isn't very supported. That's what we care about the most. And so one thing you can kind of do here, this is one of my favorite ways to outline, is like to draw like an A colon for the author, and then I'll just be like a meh, little frowny face. A little bit of disagreement there. You can write meh, you can say disagree, you could say not supported, you could say anything you want, but do kind of pull that out in terms of the author's term there. Cool. So notice we anticipated that in the very first paragraph, and it really kind of came through right off the bat. All right, so last paragraph is a super short one. How about this third paragraph? How could you kind of summarize the main idea here? Once again, yeah, it's on the first sentence. We have a related concept, so it's like continuation keyword, basically, is that words don't translate directly. You got it. So there's not always direct translations. You got it. And that's honestly what it's all about. And then we get examples, like this toka word in Russian and how it doesn't actually translate directly to English. Perfect. You got it. Nice. So you got it. Perfect. All right. Let's go into some questions. All right, so we'll do some questions here. So basically, real quick, we got the main idea this theory is proposed. The guy's like, nah, really, things don't translate so directly. This isn't actually all that supported. Question number 19. So we had a Russian individual experiences a set of life circumstances and describes his emotional experience as this toka word. Then an English-speaking person experiences the same set of circumstances, which most likely describes their emotional response. So here's the thing. Would people that have the same set of experiences experience the same emotional response? If they're put in the exact same set of circumstances, Emily's actually phrased this probably the best way. Maybe, not necessarily. You got it. So may not. I would say like we don't really know. And so this is just we like to call it a smoke screen. They're trying to make us connect dots together that aren't necessarily needing to be connected, because really this kind of gets into the guts of like emotional experiences. It can actually be changed a lot by the environment, by the language, by the context in which you experience it. Lots of ways can actually do it, and so it may or may not. It's a great way to say it. So what answer choice looks closest to that? Yeah, so right off the bat, things to not trust. This is mostly true in cars, but it actually works pretty well in psych-soc too. Any answer choices that are too definitive, she will experience an emotion. She will not experience an emotion. Too strong. We like C, may or may not experience it. So then, of course, comparing C and D, it's whether she has genetics. Well, genetics don't basically result in the same cultural circumstances. And of course, D is her own cognitive appraisal of the circumstances. And so as Marlo, Caitlin, and Charmaine is saying, D is, of course, your best answer right there. So be careful for that, and that's why we're going through this stuff, is just to give you kind of hints into the big structure of things. Don't trust things that are overly definitive, would be a way to say that, overly strong. All right, so let's, as we said, a lot of psych-soc has turned into a vocab. So let's do a little bit of vocab. Interesting thing, I'd actually not heard this before, but it's a cool thing that happens in the real world too, is that deaf children from different cultures, if you put them together, they spontaneously create a system of signs to communicate with each other, even though they don't necessarily derive from the parent languages. So these observations support which theory or view of language acquisition. This is terminology you need to know. This is a common one though. Kaylin says A. What do you guys think? Sound right? We actually covered this in the diagnostic test too. We had an example of this. You guys agree? So basically, it's that humans are predisposed to language development, would be a way to say it. So basically, it's like it's native at birth. Humans just are kind of like it's ingrained to develop language, regardless of where you are. That is a pretty straightforward example of nativism. Cool. So you can knock out C and D too. Why can you get rid of C and D? Let's talk a little bit about those two. What is a hallmark of interactionism and behavioralism? There's two things you need for those. We don't get overly granular, but yeah, it would not be spontaneous, David. That's the number one. You got it. It's basically based. You can either say past experience. It could be reinforced. You could say it. Basically that they yeah, reinforcement probably the biggest. Like, imitation or reinforcement would be what it's really all about. Learning. There we go, Dom. Yeah, learning would be another way to say it. Based on past experiences, learning, reinforcement, exactly. This is spontaneous. David brought in the key word there. It just happened on its own. The only one that really supports that is nativism. Empiricism is more about environmental roles that it's going to play in acquisition of the trait. But once again, that doesn't relate to the spontaneousness that this question stem really directed you towards. So do be aware, of course, that learning memory chapter in your review does have a bunch of different things on this. And so if you, actually what would be kind of a cool thing to do, bathroom mirrors are really, I don't know if you guys have, I know a lot of you have been in my classes before, but oh my gosh, getting a dry erase marker and covering your bathroom mirror with whatever it is that you're working on memorizing, so helpful for learning a bunch of stuff. That's the only way I learned glycolysis in the Krebs cycle, like seriously. It was a big mirror. It took a lot of time, but you got it. And so here's the thing. If it's already full, don't let the mirror get stagnant for more than a week. So leave it up for about a week, erase it. If certain things you're still working on, you can put them back up, but mostly try to like add new stuff about once a week. Awesome. The other thing you can do, you don't necessarily need more mirrors because they're expensive. If you go to like a Home Depot, Lowe's type place, you can buy this material called shower board. Shower board is basically, as it sounds, it's the board that you put inside of showers. It basically works like a whiteboard, but it's way cheaper. Whiteboards cost a fortune, but shower board, you can get like you can basically cover your entire wall of your bedroom with shower board for about 30 bucks. And so if you want more space to draw, that's a great way to do it. Do be careful. If you leave stuff on shower board for more than a couple of days, it'll stain it, and so you need to treat it. If you do a little Google searching online, you can find ways to treat it first, or what kind of solvents will help clean it if you want to swap it. Some people basically cover their shower board and just never erase it, and they just make it into a crazy MCAT system of things to memorize and literally cover an entire wall of stuff to learn, and then just leave it up all and never erase it. So it's up to you. But it's innovative studying practices, or what the MCAT is all about, and that's just another example of how to do it. Cool. All right, we'll go to the next one. Once again, looks like we're going to have the word game. It says the concept of toka is representative of human idea as opposed to a physical object. So we're talking about, of course, specifically human idea. It's related particularly to a group of individuals. So some kind of idea closely related to a group of individuals. Thus, a sociologist would describe it as an example of. Once again, let's play the word game. So which of these looks, of course, closest to, as we said, it is idea, not structural, not something you actually have. and it's related closely to a group of individuals. You guys know your stuff. It would be symbolic culture. Nice work. Perfect. A couple of things for the wrong answers here. Cultural capital refers to basically something that would increase your social status. You know, like cultural capital would be like, I've got an iWatch now, which makes me super hip, and you know, stuff like that. I think they're called iWatches. Whatever the new Apple thing is that they're starting, very popular though. Image schema is more structural, right? That's more like an actual image. We didn't talk anything about a visual image at all. And then social construct only exists within the context of a particular culture. Exactly, it's like more of a construct that exists within it. But so yeah, do be aware social constructs only exist within the context of a particular culture. This may or may not cross cultural barriers. So this is just, of course, one individual group. So nice work. You guys know your stuff. All right, so this is an awesome beginning of cues. What do you notice in the very first word that's going to give you a very big hint, whether it's cars or PsychSoc? Yeah, David, because what's that word that told you we got new info? You got suppose. If it ever starts with a suppose, most likely it's going to be a weakened, strengthened type question. So you ever see suppose, there's hypothetical new information really being included, you could say. All right, so it says, suppose a word exists in culture means uneasiness experienced upon hearing good news, but before confirming its truth. I really like the concept of this word. I thought it was really cool, personally. I think there should be a word for that. Which of the following, if true, would least support the application of the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis to this emotion. This is, of course, from the passage. So I want to find something that least supports it. All right, so now, yeah, I think that would be a really good word to have, though, because it's an experience we often do feel, but there's definitely just not a word for that. Kind of like how the toka thing that we had from Russian. All right, so that means, of course, 3 of these answer choices would be supportive. One of them, of course, would not. So what's the basics of the hypothesis? What are we really looking for here? If there was a word you could say or a phrase to basically get the gist of the hypothesis that we have here. Bingo, Marlo. So language and cognition influence each other and vice versa. Nice work. As well as we said, what about the whole translation thing? There was one other thing. It was that we kind of the toka as the example, right? That they don't always translate. There we go, exactly, Charmaine. So yeah, words don't always translate. It's based on basically experiences, right? When they have unshared experiences. So which of these is definitely going to support it? Which of these? This often when you get these least support weakened type questions, find the things that are good, eliminate them. Yeah, C is a big one. So it basically, as a result of shared experiences, there we go, individuals are generally more wary of the good news. Totally true. A is the same thing. The third word represents an emotion unique to that culture. Also matches pretty perfectly. And then what about C and D? Sorry, B and D. B and D, those two left over. Which one do you want to get rid of? Which one looks closer to the theory? Yeah, get rid of D. It can't be easily understood as a combination of those, right? It's basically saying that it doesn't translate well. Even if we have the word happiness and fear, just of course, like knowing those 2 words doesn't mean we can really translate that emotion. And so we have specific words for specific emotions because basically having the word can influence the emotion itself, and the emotion can influence the word development over a long time period. But yeah, it's basically it's a 2-way street. Language influence cognition and vice versa. So the one, of course, that would least support that is if individuals of a nearby culture absorb the word in their own lexicon. That would show that, of course, you know, the word's kind of independent of the culture, you could say, or could travel between cultures. We say that, of course, that is unique to that individual culture because it's being influenced in that 2-way street. All right, that's question number 22. So that's the first learning goal. We're going to spend the most of the rest of class going through the second learning goal here. This, I think, it's innovative way to go through it. I thought this was a super cool way to structure the class. But it's talking about the specific 4 AAMC skills and how it relates specifically to the way that it's tested in the actual test in terms of the skills check, as the AAMC likes to call it. All right, so skill number 1, AMC definition, is they will basically ask you to recognize, recall, define, and relate basic concepts in the natural and social sciences. This is very much the word game that we've been talking about, like Piaget versus Erikson versus all the different theories, knowing, what social capital is and all that other kind of stuff that we have. So now, of course, this also the concepts of scientific principles may be presented in words, graphs, tables, diagrams, and formulas. I'm sure you've noticed at this point that the PsychSoc section has just as many tables and graphs and charts, if not more, than some of the science sections in Chem Phys or Biochem. I think, honestly, PsychSoc kind of seems to have the most. I don't know if that's really true across the board, but there's loads of them. Super common. All right, so skills check. Either recognize the correct science principle. This, of course, is the straight memorization. Well, at least recall. Bathroom mirrors are really good for this. I don't know if you guys actually know this, but we talk about it actually in your PsychSoc review. Do you guys know about spaced learning? Do you know the term spaced learning? It's actually discussed in your PsychSoc review, but it's actually important for MCAT studying as well. So Kaplan has a really good learning science department. They actually do a bunch of research that kind of goes into the way that we structure our courses. But this is very much, you got it, the new wave in learning science. It's kind of taking over, not just for Kaplan, but kind of across the board in a lot of colleges. But exactly, Sarah, it's basically intervals between study sessions, help memory. The whole idea is, so there's two things I would say. Spaced learning, you don't want to just read through your PsychSoc book and be done with it. You want to read chapter 1, read chapter 2, read chapter 3, and then maybe a week later come back, reread parts of chapter 1. You want to keep re-hitting the same concepts over and over again. One thing that I actually recommend doing as well is when you do the quizzes in the back, do them in pencil if it's not too late, so then you can come back and kind of take them again from fresh. It's kind of a nice way to kind of re-hit it. But the whole idea is that you do want to basically keep hitting those same concepts over and over again, not just read it once and try to commit it the first time. It's better to have multiple exposures. The second thing that is kind of rocking Kaplan's Learning Science Division recently in terms of research that's happened in the past couple of years is that, did you know that if you have a couple different groups, we'll go through an example study that you'd probably see in the PsychSoc section, but we'll do it as a straight MCAT example. If you have 5 groups of people, one of them you have study, test, 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 test. The other group you have study, 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 test. Another one do study, study, test, test, test. Do you know who performs the best? The one with the most studying then testing, or the one with little studying and the most testing? Guess who performs or has the highest long-term retention? The most testing. Straight up, that's the crazy thing. So it's like, scientifically speaking, by studying less and testing more, it increases your retention instead of studying a bunch of times and taking one test where you tend to forget the information fairly soon after the test itself. Which means not only full-length exams, and as you know, you're kind of knee-deep in the full-length exams at this point, but even the quizzes. What I'm trying to get at here is, you know how we say that you want to divide your study sessions up into about 90 to 100-minute blocks, because that's how long the sections are on the MCAT as well? It's essential for you to, within every single study block, to end at least with a quiz itself. Like, you got to be doing quizzes, you have to be doing testing, you got to be quizzing yourself across the entire board. But exactly, it trains you to see what's important, and the key is, Kaylin, it's also an application thing. It trains you to synthesize, utilize, and incorporate and apply. That's really what it's all about, is applying the knowledge to a context, not just reading it to learn it, you know? Exactly, there you go. So the reason I want to talk about this today is, of course, it's useful for studying for the MCAT, and also it's the kind of stuff that can show up in questions on the PsychSoc section. Like, they talk about spaced learning in the test itself. So you want to be aware of it and, of course, use it to apply it. And Ed also is going to be teaching the learning study skills next, and I believe he's even going to incorporate a bunch of the PsychSoc stuff you need to know for the test into basically how you can apply it and really learn it. Basically the stuff we're talking about now is spaced learning and testing and all that kind of stuff. So he'll be in soon covering that after this class in about half an hour. All right, so that's the first one. So recognizing, of course, those scientific principles. Best way to recognize is to practice, right, applying it. Identify relationships among closely related concepts. This is like the golden ticket of the AMC. This is why you'll see, like, in the Chem Phys section, they're talking about, like, kinematics, but the question's going to end up being about amino acids. It's finding the bridge and how things relate together. So here's the second thing that I have for you in terms of practice. So I might be dating myself, but do you guys remember the Kevin Bacon game? Ed knows this. He and I worked together last summer at the summer intensive program. We actually worked this into the MCAT. It was fun. Yeah, the 5 degrees to Kevin, or 6 degrees, whatever it is, exactly. The 5 degrees to Kevin Bacon or 6 degrees to Kevin Bacon. What we actually did, so we basically work at the Boulder Summer Intensive problem. Okay, cool. Here you go, Marlo. Is that we played the exact same game, but with science concepts. So we would basically challenge someone to say, all right, we're starting off with kinematics, and I want you to end in enzyme kinetics. And you would have to find basically 5 steps between those in how you got from one to the other. And so basically you start with kinematics and be like, well, kinematics deals with velocity. Then with velocity, you could actually pretty quickly get to reaction velocity, to get to kinetics there. But try to pick ones that are really far apart and weird. It's really good if you do have a couple other pre-med type people and friends that are studying the same stuff, and basically just try to challenge each other to it. And it's really cool because it makes you think about things differently. It makes you connect the topics and how they all relate to each other. So I agree, it should be a board game. It's pretty fun, but try it out. I'm going to try to give you an application for this entire class and how you can use it to your advantage. If you want, Charmaine. The one problem, though, with studying while drinking is what? Let's use PsychSoc terms to talk about it. What is the issue with drinking while studying? It will build up a state dependency. Is exactly true. So contextual learning tends to focus more on the environment and what you're doing. State dependencies tends to be more like actual neurological state. So it would be both, Sarah. It's totally true. But if it's a chemical, they tend to use state dependency. Just but it is the same idea. But you got it. So you'd also have to then test drunk. Do not test drunk. It's a bad idea. Just across the board. Not a good thing to do. Exactly. Dom's got the take home for that one. I won't get into that, but I do know people who have supported that fully, that they thought one drink of something helped them do better on the test. I have no idea. It's never seen a study done on it, but I do know people who say that, Emily. So I don't want to take a stance on that issue, though, personally. All right. Properly using equations we have as well. That will be a bigger part, of course, in the Chem-Phys type section of the test, but you can see here as well. All right, so that's the first definition, and of course some applications, ways that you can kind of do it and get good at it. Let's go and use this question as an example. All right, so which of the following sets of metrics would least be helpful in determining trends in upward mobility? All right, so let's talk about it. What's upward mobility? Yeah, increasing socioeconomic status. High status is exactly true. Which of these is definitely going to be associated with determining demographics, basically upward mobility? A for sure, employment, disposable income, that's huge. B for sure, literacy, education level, also pretty much definite there. And oh hey, look, also housing and housing stability is probably the bigger part of that, I'd say. C, so we're left with a definite crime and enforcement of laws. That would be more of course, a downward mobility. Increasing crime within a given demographic would show downward mobility, not upward mobility. So basically, people having more resources would be a very general way to say upward mobility. Resources across the board in terms of education, disposable income, and whatnot like that. All right, so that's first one. Let's do number 2. So second learning goal of the MCAT was questions that test scientific reasoning and problem-solving skills from questions in the previous category by asking you to use your scientific knowledge and problem-solving in these sciences. So basically, so the whole idea is everything we said in the first goal is to know this stuff. Goal number 2 is basically application of that stuff. And so it's really like how you would apply it in the context of, whatever problems they really give you. And so skills check would be initially recognizing correct scientific principles and relationships among concepts. This was the same stuff we did a lot of it in the previous class when we went through the Chem-Phys stuff, where a lot is like, oh, they're talking about this, so it's talking about velocity, so that's continuity equation. Continuity equation relates to Bernoulli's equation, and of course, if velocity goes up, pressure goes down. I know if you weren't here for the previous class, that was a lot of words, but it's relating, of course, the relationships between the concepts, and it's kind of looking for that key word there. It's like a big way that you see this is the difference between like the kinetic product versus the thermodynamic product. And it's kind of like when you see the reactions like done at very low temperature, what would that favor? So low temperature over kinetic or thermodynamic product. We don't cover this today, but yeah, nice. You guys know it, the kinetic product. Perfect. So it's like looking for those little hints that it's like at 0 degrees Celsius, like, oh, that means low temperature. Okay, then we're talking kinetic. And it's starting to pull out those different pieces of information, how you can actually apply it to the context of, whether product A or product B is going to be more prevalent. Cool. So reasoning about principles, evaluating arguments, cause, consequence, expectations, and predictions. You see this a lot in the context of experiments, where like experimenter does this to prove this, figure out whether it actually the experiment worked or if the experiment did not working at all. And so really, and this is one thing to write down. If there is ever something you gotta find, no matter what across the board in any experiment, it is the goal of the experiment, number one, and the results of the experiment, number two. So like that's kind of what this is all getting at. Like know your goal, know your results, see if it matched, and of course also recognize if findings either challenge or invalidate a given scientific theory. Generally speaking, passages won't give you information that's legit, breaking apart commonly accepted theories. More will be likely to invalidate a theory that the scientist themselves proposes. Will be a real common way you can see that showing up. And of course, determining and using formulas to solve a problem. The big thing I will say about this is definitely focus on use your units. We did a real good example of this in the last class where we had that the only unit question we really did in that test review. But man, if you get really good at your units and know the component units, you can break down a lot of answer choices and solve them without actually knowing them. And that's what we did in our last review, was kind of eliminated 3 without even knowing necessarily what the units were for magnetic field and magnetic force. All right, let's do this one. Super common concept here. They actually give you the hint in the question stem itself, but it's applying Weber's law to a novel situation. Weber's law is actually one of the very first thing that shows up in the AMC's list of PsychSoc topics too. So it's a big one. It's definitely right near the top of their game. All right, so we got an example here. You got a person cannot taste the difference in heat between this 500 IHU and 700. So that's indistinguishable. But they do notice it between 500 and 800. So tell me, let's use some outside knowledge here. What does Weber's law focus on? We'll get big picture first, and then we'll get a little bit more granular. So least detectable difference, you got it. So it's the just noticeable difference and proportional to the original magnitude of sensation. Exactly true. It's finding a ratio, name it. Think of it as a percent difference. So now, here's the thing. You can actually disregard all of this information in the question stem. You don't even need to use any of it at all. Because here's the cool thing. We're looking for which of the following is going to be indistinguishable to the person. So all we got to do is screw the information about the 500, 700, and 500, and 800. When you look at these numbers, what are we really just looking for? We're just going to find something that's indistinguishable, thus find the thing that has the smallest ratio. That's the key, right? So not necessarily difference. I see what you mean, Alyssa, but remember, it's the difference in terms of ratios. It's the difference in terms of percentages. That's the difference. Because notice, if you look at number D, 2 and 3, oh my gosh, it's only one hot unit. That seems like it'd be super easy, it's only one. But what's the ratio between 2 and 3? The difference between them is only actually, it's a giant difference. It's a huge difference. It's a massive percent difference between the two. Depending on the order in which you do it, you could argue if you go from 3 to 2, it would be exactly a third. But notice if you say 2 and then 3, what is actually the difference? Yeah, exactly. That's a 50% increase. And so here it's not going to make a big difference which ones we're comparing this compared to that. But exactly, do be careful. Like generally speaking, you have to use the initial stimulus compared to the second stimulus. Cool. Yeah, perfect. All right. So we'll go through them. What's the ratio for the very first one? And here's like the idea of basically the just noticeable difference. I'm giving you the ones at the top. You don't actually. No, it's right. What's the difference? Yeah, that's all there. Also 1.5, so basically that's an increase in terms of 50%. We know the bottom one was also an increase in about 50%. So now let's looking at just B and C. Which one looks closer? Which one looks like it would be the smallest percent? B for sure. You got it. B is definitely going to be a whole lot smaller. 7,500. That's if it went up to 1,500, that'd be another 50% change. It's not quite that extreme, but it's pretty close. And then 200 to 275, that's not all that different. Totally not all that different at all. Nice work. All right, so kind of breaking them all down. A shows 1/2, as we said, change. B would be 3/8. C would be 2/3, and of course, B would be 1/2. One thing to be aware of here too. If you kind of struggle with ratios like this, with like the 200 to 275. Notice we have a change of 75 with the initial stimulus of 200. what you can do here is, if you don't know how to turn this into a ratio that makes sense, what I recommend doing is actually turning it into a decimal. The way that you turn any number into a decimal is by multiplying the top and the bottom by numbers that turn the bottom into just ones and zeros. So that leaves you with a 1,000 on the bottom, which will make it a pretty nice decimal. And then 75 times 5 would give you, what is that, 225? I guess I could do it real quick. 25, that'd give you 165. Yeah, exactly. There we go. Cool. But so, like, if you ever do want to go through it, not too big of a deal. It doesn't actually take all that long. And so you could say, all right, it's 0.165, and 0.165 is 3/8. And so you could do 0.5, 1.165, et cetera, down the board. So cool. Or 3.75, sorry, 0.375. That was the 3 there. Yeah, because 7, yeah, there, I did my math wrong, but 0.375. Thanks. Cool. All right. We'll skip that for now. But so mostly, you don't even need to do the math. You can look at it. You can say, all right, it's definitely not A and D between B and C. B is definitely a whole lot closer than C is. So look at the change. Look at the difference between the two. All right, we'll do number 32 here. Same idea. Move it on from Weber's law. All right, so what is the key word in the question summary, the concept here that we're applying? Assimilation, exactly. So it would be, which of the following scenarios would it be the slowest? We want the least assimilation. So what are some factors that affect assimilation? So getting one culture to assimilate into a different culture. So ethnic enclaves would, yeah, that'd be something that would slow it down, right? If you basically can isolate them and put them into a little enclave, exactly. But yeah, so things that would kind of like change it, make assimilation happen more, is socioeconomic status, first of all, right? If one culture, of course, has a higher socioeconomic status, it incentivizes the one culture to assimilate to basically increase their own socioeconomic status. Geographic distribution, so basically if people are spread out would be another one, right? Whereas if you're very consolidated, it would kind of prevent assimilation, right? Because you're kind of more stuck in your own little neighborhood. Kind of like cities like Chicago actually had very slow assimilation because they were very neighborhoody, where, you've got Greektown, you've got Little Italy, you've got all these places where people basically didn't even learn to speak English for generations because it was very easy to just survive within your own neighborhood. Exactly. Similar to new culture model is another really good one, right? Like language attainment, right? If you learn the language, it makes it easier. If you don't, it's going to make it harder. Stuff like that, as well as intermarriage is the other really big one. That's a super assimilation happens pretty quickly when it becomes common that intermarriage happens. All right, so if we want the slowest, which of these looks like it would cause the slowest? A, you got it. So that's basically like an example of Chicago, where, instead of having basically distributed geography across the whole city, you get everyone from a certain country settles in one little neighborhood, which then slows down assimilation because you can still basically exist comfortably using your own normal culture, language, and all heritage. Nice. Cool. Perfect. And there we got similarity for B. Once again, significant socioeconomic advantage incentivizes people to change into the new culture, as well as intermarriage. So all the big concepts right there. All right, moving on towards the end, got 2 more learning goals before we call it quits. So the next one is questions that test reasoning about the design and execution of research. This is super common in the PsychSoc section. So not only analyzing the research, you often need to analyze in terms of validity, both internal and external validity, as well as ethical concerns could be the other really big one. And so I know in full-length 2 review, we do a bunch of stuff on ethical type issues, as well as validity in terms of the actual PsychSoc review that we made for that class. Cool. So there you go. Reasoning, basically show what's good with the study, what's wrong with the study, and how you can interpret results would be a big one. And then after you understand your, demonstrate your understanding of the components using the methodology. So you need to know the different types of methods used a lot, electrophoresis, know SDS page versus polyacrylamide and all that kind of stuff. Know different types of chromatography, basically like experimental lab techniques, like DNA sequencing even can show up quite a bit. All right. So skills check, the ways that you'll find that, of course. Identify the role of the theory, past finding observations in scientific questioning. You will sometimes find passages that will use outdated scientific theories. So like talk about, like, what would they call it? The like geocentric universe even, where we think the Earth is the center, and then try to basically get you to use information to show how what information in the passage was incorrect, how you can use it to actually, show your understanding that's actually the true things ways work. Identifying testable research questions. Certain things are untestable. There's a whole slew of reasons why things are untestable. We go through a lot of that stuff in your actual in the on-site course. We spent some time talking about that. There's a whole page that breaks it down. Determining whether results are generalizable. What would that relate to more, internal or external validity? The generalizability. Yeah, like that'd be your external validity, right? So, of course, how you can generalize it to the rest of the population, or how well your what do we call it? Your subject pool, your what do they call that? Your the population, I guess you call it, the sample. There you go. How well the sample relates to the population. Thanks, Natalie. You got it. That would be, of course, your external validity, how generalizable it is. Thanks for the terms. As you know, we're all learning all the new terms. So then, of course, identifying dependent versus independent variables. Let's do this the tricky way. Generally speaking, if you were going to graph this, which of these would be the y-axis? We'll do this the weird way instead of just straightforward, the way you normally see it. If you're going to graph it, which would be the y-axis? Nice, Emily. Generally speaking, the dependent variable is the y-axis. The independent variable, of course, would be your x-axis. Basically, independence what you manipulate, dependence what the results are, would be the way to think of it. So yeah, the dependent is dependent on the science. The independent you are manipulating as an experimenter. Other ways, reasoning about study features that affect associations, causal relationships. This is like the big causation versus correlations, a really big way that that can show up. And of course, not confusing the two. And then, of course, identifying conclusions that are supported by results. A lot of this works out to be graph interpretation. So much graph interpretation. You need to be very, very, very comfortable with it. All right. Oh, and of course, also real-world implications can show up as well. That goes into the whole ethical concerns as well. Like, if you're going to do research, is it actually going to benefit the rest of humanity, or just, this one person? Makes a big difference. All right, and that's what I already said. Ethical issues in research, other big things. Know the Belmont report, right? Know the big things about, of course, justice, non-maleficence, or we call beneficence. Is that the word? Beneficence, that's the word. Beneficence. There we go. And all that kind of stuff as well. So know that stuff, especially in PsychSoc, so huge. All right, let's do these. We got a couple more things to knock out before we call it quits. Looking at the question stem, what are we analyzing here? What stands out? There's two things we're comparing. So we got a subject, seeing if they're voting Republican, and we're exposing them to two different situations. One is yeah, group versus solo. Totally true. So basically we got either a group of 10 people that are favoring the Republican Party versus one person who's favoring the Republican Party. And what do we find about the results? Is it consistent or is it disparate? According to the way that these people then vote, which would be a private thing. We don't even, they don't even know. Super disparate. You got to get rid of consistent, because notice 32%. Specifically speaking, if you're politically independent, you would expect them to vote 50-50 down the line. Whereas if you expose them to one person who is Republican, 32% of them only will vote Republican. Whereas if they're a room of 10 people, oh my gosh, 2/3 of them are now going to vote Republican. Huge difference, big, big, big difference. So it's definitely going to be disparate, either influence of social factors or disparate social identity. Which of these two relates to the actual question stem's difference? Social factors or social identity? We'll say social. Charmaine says factors. I agree with you. Definitely social factors. Why not social identity? There's a couple ways you can interpret it. Are they then afterwards going to go and then hang out with the group of 10 people and, celebrate the election? No, they didn't join the group or anything like that, right? It's a private process. Like you're going to go and vote, then it's over with. You don't really become part of it. They're not really now identifying as, like a, Republican. They're self-identified. They already self-identified as politically independent. They're just happening to vote Republican. So it's not so much about their identity as much as their social factors influencing the way that they vote. That's the key, the self-identified as politically independent. Cool. All right, that brings us to our last learning goal for the day. Of course, the last learning goal that the AMC has for you in terms of their definition, it's questions that test the fourth skill are going to ask you how you can do science. So demonstrate your database and statistical reasoning skills themselves. So a lot of this is going to be basically using, analyzing, interpreting data, figures, charts, tables, graphs. Remember, this also showed up in the other learning goals, but this one's getting much more specific and just dialing into just those, like the results themselves. So a couple of things, evaluate whether the representations are appropriate for the particular observed data. So basically, does this match what was stated in the actual passage? Do the results match? Does the data match? I'm evaluating measures of central tendency, right? Looking for statistical consistency there, as well as dispersion, so spreading it out across the board. Also, random versus systematic error. Let me give you an example. Let's say that you have, actually, let's do this. Let's say that accuracy is high, precision is low. If you have high accuracy, low precision, which of these two would that be closer to? Random or systematic? So high accuracy, low precision. Let's tie in a bunch of stuff today. It's fun to do this. That would be more nice work, Emily, more random error. You got it. So if this is like a dart, I know they always show this with a dartboard. Sorry for being stereotypical. But the way that you would kind of describe something as being high accuracy but low precision, it would be basically clustered around the bullseye but not too much getting in. So this would be basically considered accurate, not precise. Thus, it'd be more random, you would say. It's all over the place, right? It's not in one specific place. Whereas if you have high precision but low accuracy, high precision but low accuracy would mean you'd basically have all of them clustered somewhere very close together, very precise, but it's not where you want it to be. So this would be, of course, precise, not accurate. And this would be more systematic error. So in this case, it'd be like, for example, if you have a scale and the scale is teared off by a couple grams, every single measurement is going to be wrong by the exact same amount. Whereas if you're doing scales during an earthquake, well, sometimes it's going to measure heavier versus lighter because the ground's actually vibrating. You don't know whether you're going to have an upward or downward momentum of the actual earth as you're taking that measurement. So that'd be more of a random error. So cool. A couple of the common ways that you see that stuff show up. Other things, reasoning about statistical significance and uncertainty. We talked about that a little bit a while ago as well. And using the data to describe relationships and make predictions. One thing I got to say before we move on to our last question of the day, but oh my gosh, if there is one thing the MCAT loves to test, it's relationships between variables. If you ever see, like, if this increases, that increases, or if this increases, that decreases, you need to keep track of those relationships. Like across the board, all parts of the test, that's huge. And last one's, of course, using the data to answer research questions, and of course, as always, draw conclusions. That's the same stuff we've been talking about the whole class. All right, so last question we're going to do for the day is this one right here to show some data interpretation. Let us know what's going on here. So we got a 1970 poll. So the data is in the 1970s, people love living in the suburbs. Not so many people like the cities, and barely anybody likes rural areas. Now that it's the future, people still don't really like rural areas, but way less people like suburbs and more people are liking cities. So that means there's definitely a shift. So actually, answer choice A, B, C, and D, though, all have shift. So what's the shift towards? Yeah, exactly. So negative to positive shift, exactly true. Yeah, Emily is spot on here. Basically, the whole idea here is that we used to have a negative association with urban living, right, or living in the city, where nowadays, and notice this is also specifically looking at U.S. population with incomes above the national median, right? So we're talking, of course, affluent people here specifically. And so we know affluent people used to live in the suburbs. Now affluent people want to live in the cities, which is why everyone's rents are going up, which of course is why we know that there's not, and it's going to be, of course, negative to positive correlation between affluence and urban living. So nice work in terms of the correlations there. So we also can't really infer the underlying phenomenon of what it is. Like, demographic shift favoring agrarianism to urbanization. We don't really know that at all. Also, rural is still pretty low, so we don't really suspect that. Last one's demographic shift showing urban incorporation of suburbs. We also don't have any information showing that. All we know is the negative to positive correlation between basically living in the suburbs and living in the cities. All right. So nice work today, team. Remember, we do have another session after this. Actually, Ed's going to run through the study skills. He's going to hit a lot of the major things that we talked about in the previous, this class actually, in terms of learning, memory, and all that stuff. So we'll kind of give you skills, structure, calendar, and all that kind of stuff. The things that we covered today, of course, was running through passages, scan quickly, found the conceptual stuff, gave a bunch of additional examples, talked about how to knock out the questions in a short period of time, and then we talked about the 4 different study skills that the MCAT needs, how you recognize them, how you utilize them, and how to really take advantage of the AMC's own website to really make sure that you have all the things that you need for test day. All right, if you have any questions, let us know. We'll be hanging out in the Q&A. I'll be sticking around for the next hour helping out. But in the meantime, enjoy your next channel session, and you will see Ed in the very, very near future. You're very welcome. See you guys soon.